Howdy y'all, welcome back, thank you for being here. Today, we're going to get into the somewhat mysterious history of the Amish. Seeing as I'm from southern Pennsylvania, I've encountered my fair share of Amish on a nearly daily basis. However, before discussing just how prevalent the Amish community is here in Pennsylvania, let us first begin by trying to make some ties between the old world, the current narrative regarding the Amish, and everyone's favorite lost people, the Tartarians. The origins of the Amish could not be discussed without bringing up the Anabaptist Movement. In my younger days, I remember I used to mispronounce this as anti-Baptist movement, and I remember once I was sternly corrected and told that is not what that means. Yet, in a nutshell, the Anabaptist movement was a form of protest against the way baptisms occurred in the majority of Christian faiths. Considered part of the larger radical Reformation, the Anabaptist movement essentially claimed that a person should have the choice to be baptized, essentially claiming that this choice to proclaim one's faith to God was quintessential to a true baptism. Many in the Anabaptist movement saw the practice of infant baptism as a sort of way that the church was claiming souls. What some may say was a claiming of a new reliable workforce, an army, a subservient member of society who was then indebted to the church for life. As we've discussed before, many of the largest cities in our not so distant past were fortified cities. Many times these were star forts, but even earlier cities were often fortified with even larger walls, and many have theorized that these massive walls of the past, which surrounded even the most ancient of cities in our history, that these walls could have been used for ulterior purposes other than defense, as in to keep the people inside, to keep the workforce, the indentured servants, inside the city. Think centuries later, when we do have the star forts that began to fall in North America during the Industrial Revolution, and then we have the end of slavery and what followed, the rise of thousands of insane asylums, essentially locations where the poor or those deemed to be unfit for society would be kept and they would be put to work to usher in the new workforce in America. Alas, what I'm saying is, the Anabaptist movement appeared to be fueled by the idea that choice was the key to proper service of a higher power. And this movement believed the practice of infant baptism was forcing individuals into servitude. Again, the Anabaptist movement arose in Switzerland around the early 1520s with preacher and scholar Ulrich Zwingli. We're told by January 23rd of 1523, Ulrich had established a strong society of like-minded individuals who held the first re-baptisms of those who had been baptized as infants, marking the official beginning of the Anabaptist movement. By 1530, the Anabaptist movement had gained popularity and notoriety and reached the Netherlands. From here, the Anabaptists actually seized control of Munster, leading to the Munster Rebellion of 1534 through 1535, which occurred in the city of Munster, at that time a leading city of the Holy Roman Empire. Now here is where we get to a really interesting tidbit in this narrative. By 1540, we are told the Anabaptist numbers had grown sizably. Due to persecution, however, many Anabaptists migrated to the lands of the Germanic peoples, where they created what were said to be sizable communities. If you've watched my recent video about Russia or Tartary in America, then this next portion really becomes the meat and potatoes of this video. The Anabaptists in these Germanic lands amalgamated together before heading to Russia to form what are known as the Russian Mennonites. Around the late 18th century, so right around the exact same time that Russians or Tartarians officially began landing in America, the Russian Mennonites also began arriving to the west coast of America. By 1874, the Russian Mennonites had migrated again to the central United States along the prairies, and we're told these Russian or Tartarian Mennonites are the widest spread of all Mennonite groups in the world, having official communities in all countries mentioned already, as well as Canada, Mexico, Paraguay, Bolivia, Belize, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. The original Anabaptists as a whole became known as the Swiss Brethren, as the entire Anabaptist movement, and indeed Mennonite and Amish beliefs, arose out of Switzerland roughly 500 years ago. Now let's dive into this a bit deeper. The Amish are named for Jacob Ammon, and I couldn't help but initially notice the similarities between Ammon's name and Ammon, like Ammon-Ra, the sun god, the leading god of Egypt, and the blue deity who was said to have held all the secrets of ancient Egypt. Anabaptists arose after scholars were said to have studied from different ancient texts, possibly including Egyptian, and furthermore, the two men who were rebaptized to begin Anabaptism were Conrad Graybill and George Blue Rock. Anyway, the term Amish was first used as an insult against the supporters of Jacob Ammon. A schism had arose in Anabaptism where some thought that fallen believers, those who abandoned their faith or sinned, should only be withheld communion and not withheld a home or regular meals. However, Jacob Ammon believed that those who lost their faith or broke their vows lost all of their rights to communion, as well as lost their rights to a home and regular meals. This is where the difference arises that those who live in Pennsylvania like me are all too familiar with. Ammon's believers became known as the Amish, while the other sect of the Anabaptists became known as the Swiss Mennonite Conference, or simply Mennonites. However, all of this was occurring in Europe, and it wasn't until 1717 that the Amish arrived to Pennsylvania, settling in what is today Lancaster. Would you believe it if I told you that the Amish arrived here in 1717, and the area code for Lancaster and the landscape that the Amish settled is 717? What a coincidence. We're told the Amish were mostly unimpacted by major conflicts of that time period and beyond, and by the Civil War, over 2,000 unique Amish families had arrived to America, with their population numbers being even greater than that, given the sheer amount of families that had multiplied and reproduced. We're talking tens of thousands of Amish people living throughout America who arrived here from 1717 through 1850. And yet, just like so many other unexplainable events around the mid-19th century, around the year 1850, we have a rapid decline in Amish communities in America, with a majority of these communities assimilating with the Mennonite communities around them, and others losing members so rapidly that the communities were forced to disband entirely. This is really interesting, given that we have so much going on at the time period in the mid-19th century, from rapidly advancing equipment used in farming, industrial revolution techniques that would change the farming industry forever, as well as the advent of many new technologies, most of which are still shunned by the Amish community today. Cameras and telephones were the first important technologies that were rejected by the Amish, but soon followed the rejection of cars, tractors, radios, and many other technological inventions of the 19th and 20th centuries. We also have the mid-1800s founding of thousands of asylums and the end of slavery both seem to work hand in hand with one another to put more stress on the Amish communities to produce and fall in line. We're told the last official Amish community in Germany, for example, merged with a neighboring Mennonite one in 1937. And in many parts of Europe, the Amish are today a non-existent group. It was only in small regions of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as other smaller undocumented communities in America, where the true Amish survived. Estimates vary, but some claim that upwards of 80 to 90% of Amish communities that existed in the year 1850 had dissolved or converted to become Mennonites by the end of World War I. Yet, the Amish today remain a pillar of America for which the country would not function without their tireless work. Approximately 12,000 of the 40,000 dairy farms in the United States are Amish owned. The Amish orientation is the motive for rejecting labor-saving technologies that might make one less dependent on the community. Modern innovations, such as electricity, might spark a competition for status goods, or photographs may cultivate personal vanity. Electric power lines would be going against the Bible, which says that you shall not be, quote, conformed to the world. Romans 12:2. Amish children are not officially members of the church and do not become so until baptism occurs at adulthood, which varies by individual and community, but usually occurs between the ages of 16 and 23. On average, about 85% of Amish youth choose to be baptized and to join the church. The Amish community also has a Rumspringa, also known as the wild time or the running around, which is the time directly before an Amish youth may choose to become baptized. During this period of freedom, all Amish youths are given the ability to do anything they see fit without consequence or ramifications from their community. It is with this freedom that the Amish teenagers must decide if they wish to adhere to the life set forth for them or if they choose to become ostracized and removed from their Amish heritage. The language of the Amish is a German dialect, and yet here in Pennsylvania, it is referred to as Pennsylvania Dutch, because the Amish movement began in Switzerland and then rose rapidly in the Netherlands, which is where a majority of the customs and traditions were formed. For 300 years, the Pennsylvania Amish have built immaculate forms of engineering, including being responsible for what was at that time the longest bridge in the world, the Susquehanna-Wrightsville Bridge of 1812. This bridge crossed the mighty Susquehanna River, standing over 1 mile long, and was built on dozens of piers stretched across the river, all of which survive today, although the bridge is long gone. This entire original bridge from 1812 was said to be an Amish-style covered bridge constructed by the Slaymaker family and other prominent Amish families in the area. The Amish are master architects, and yet they never flaunt their skills, but their work has been showcased in every fiber and every facet of Pennsylvania's history. The Amish became greatly ostracized following World War I, as the Amish were considered to be a Germanic people by most of America. The Amish were labeled as Huns alongside the Germans, with the Huns being a fierce and historical, often misunderstood group of Scythian or Tartarian conquerors who constantly befuddled and did battle against the Romans. Again, war propaganda of the early 1900s leading up to World War I often painted all Germanic or German-speaking people as Huns or barbarians, and the Amish's refusal of technology did very little to quell public opinion. It was due to this reason, we're told, that many Amish in America left their communities in the early 1900s. Amish numbers dwindle, and many joined Mennonite movements, while still others, in fear, left the Anabaptist lifestyle entirely. With the loss of many members of the Amish community and the restricting of freedoms placed upon groups during World War I, when society truly left the Amish out to dry, we also see during this time that the history of the Amish is one that has constantly been swept under the rug and never given the credit it deserves. Much like the indigenous people or the Tartarians, the Amish have truly shaped entire landscapes and shifted entire cultures. They literally run America, proportionally controlling most of the farms and therefore most of our supplies of food. And yet, no one discusses this community at length because often we believe they do not want to be discussed. And if history really is full of these cyclical events, if history truly does repeat itself, I think the best thing we can do for the Amish is to respect them, to give them our blessing, and to mostly leave them alone. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. There were a lot of concepts in this video that I just briefly touched on, but I would love to hear your opinion on them more deeply, and we will talk about them in subsequent videos to come. There are many ties that can be made here between the hidden history of the Amish, the hidden history of Tartaria, of the Golden Horde, of whatever mysterious group that history has obviously put a veil over. If you believe that this one unified kingdom, what some call Tartary, if you believe that this existed and had so much direct influence over the rest of the world, when we actually begin to look at true histories or accepted histories, when we look at them with a grain of salt, and we can see how so many different landscapes were decimated throughout time, and then we have the main culprits always being put as the ones to blame in these different narratives, whether it be the Romans or the Golden Horde or the Germans. We have this history, and it all appears to be so cyclical. We land on the Amish, who single-handedly, from a lot of what I've read, and believe me, being from Pennsylvania, I've done probably 10,000 hours of research just on Pennsylvania's history alone, and nearly every single narrative about every single piece of architecture or construction project before the year 1850 almost always includes the Amish somewhere in the narrative, having their hand in that construction. Truly, it appears that the Amish in America were some of the first master masons that we had here. And it brings into question Pennsylvania, the Mason-Dixon line, the incorporating of different indigenous groups as well as the Amish in the construction of the earliest cities in America. And now, most of that credit is not given to those groups anymore. We can see that the Amish have these labels placed upon them as being some of the greatest architects of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, and yet we do not know the full extent of their efforts. We do see the results of their creations, though, in the foundations of the cities that are still standing today. It's in the very shape of our country that we see around us, in the very food that we eat, the dairy, everything we put on our plates every single day has some influence from the Amish around us. And it's more than most people will ever understand. So I just wanted to make this video to give you some food for thought, hopefully to spark your interest and to give you a little bit more information and to put a little respect onto this often misunderstood community, because they really do have such a vast impact on American life, even to this day.
But when we look at the old world or pre-1900 history of America, and even in the history of Europe, we can find that the Amish had such a large influence that we really never hear about in today's education systems. So that is why I made this video. I also wanted to share with you all of these amazing photographs I've taken in my adventures over the last few months, going through southeastern Pennsylvania, and most of these old architectural ruins, most of these protected landscapes are either indigenous landscapes or they are old pieces of architecture that were built by the Amish.